Rapid cuts of chaos, argument, stress, then sudden freeze frame into absolute stillness. You're in a heated argument. Your colleague has just undermined you in front of the entire team. Your heart rate spikes to 120 beats per minute. Adrenaline floods your system.
Every fiber of your being screams for retaliation, for the cutting remark, the defensive outburst, the emotional counterattack. But then you choose silence, not the silence of defeat, not the silence of someone who has nothing to say, but the silence of absolute control. The silence of a predator who knows that the kill comes not from noise but from stillness. In that moment, in that gap between stimulus and response, you wield the most dangerous power available to the human mind: absolute silence.
The Stoic philosopher Epictetus, a man who lived as a slave before becoming one of history's greatest teachers, explicitly advised practitioners to pause when confronted with a challenging impression. He said, "Wait for me, a little impression. Allow me to see who you are and what you represent."
Allow me to put you to the test. Think about what he's saying. He's not suppressing the impression. He's not pretending it doesn't exist. He's creating space, a sacred pause, where his rational mind can examine the impression before granting it access to his soul. This is not passive withdrawal.
This is active warfare against your own weakest impulses. This is the discipline of the Inner Citadel. A man's best treasure is a thrifty tongue. The ancient Greek poet Hesiod understood this 2,800 years ago. In an age of sophists and orators, where speech was currency and rhetoric was power, he declared that the greatest treasure a person can possess is a restrained tongue, not because speech is worthless, but because silence, properly deployed, is priceless.
40x, higher cancer incidence in those who chronically repress emotions. But here's what most people never understand, what the pop psychology gurus won't tell you. Silence is a double-edged sword. The same neural pathways used for Stoic self-regulation can be hijacked into something pathological.
The same silence that can save you can also kill you. Let's talk about the research. The Cervenka study followed 1,400 participants over 10 years, tracking their emotional coping styles and health outcomes. The researchers weren't looking for dramatic findings. They expected modest correlations.
What they found instead was shocking.
Individuals who consistently repressed their emotions, those who maintained a rational and anti-emotional coping style, who never showed anger, who kept everything bottled up in the name of control, had cancer mortality rates 40 times higher than those who expressed emotions healthily. 40 times.
Higher, the repressive personality. The person who appears strong, disciplined, unflappable on the surface, is literally dying inside. Their immune system is compromised. Their glucocorticoid levels are chronically elevated.
Their sympathetic nervous system is stuck in overdrive, pumping stress hormones through their veins like poison. The greatest cure for anger is delay. Seneca said the greatest cure for anger is delay. But he didn't mean repression. He meant the pause, the space where you can examine the anger, understand it, and choose whether to act from it or transcend it. The Frederick II experiment in the 13th century proved the biological necessity of connection with brutal clarity.
The Holy Roman Emperor, curious about the nature of language, ordered a group of infants to be raised with perfect physical care, adequate food, clean blankets, warmth, but with absolute silence from their caregivers. They were never spoken to, never held, never acknowledged. Every single infant died.
They didn't just fail to thrive. they cease to exist. Their bodies simply shut down without the stimulus of human connection, of voice, of touch. Silence, in that context, was death. 2.5x higher mortality rate for socially isolated individuals. Modern research confirms this.
Socially isolated individuals have 2.5 times higher chance of dying from the same illness as those with strong social bonds. Loneliness kills as effectively as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So when we talk about mastering emotions through silence, we're not talking about isolation.
We're not talking about repression. We're talking about something far more nuanced, far more dangerous, and far more powerful.
Empty room, ticking clock, growing psychological tension. In interpersonal relationships, absolute silence becomes something else entirely, a weapon. Psychologists classify the silent treatment as emotional torture. It's not just cruelty. It's a calculated strategy of psychological domination.
The silent treatment is the primary tool of what psychologists call dangerous personalities. Psychopaths, narcissists, individuals who lack empathy and see other people as objects to be controlled. These personalities comprise 2 to 4% of the general population.
That means in a room of 100 people, 2 to 4 of them are capable of using silence as a weapon without a flicker of conscience. The mechanism is brutally simple. Withhold acknowledgement until the victim feels invisible, powerless, ready to do anything for a crumb of attention.
1 minute of silence is negligible. An hour creates anxiety. A day creates desperation. A week can drive a person to madness. Psychologists compare it to Chinese water torture. A single drop of water falling on your forehead means nothing.
But drop after drop after drop for hours, for days, the mind begins to fracture. The silent treatment works the same way. Each minute of silence is a drop, each hour is a cascade, and the victim, starved of the basic human need for acknowledgement, begins to break.
4% population with psychopathic traits who weaponize silence. But here's the twist that makes this even more insidious. Victims of manipulative silence often respond with their own silence. Not because they're strong, but because they're ashamed. Ashamed at being conned.
Ashamed at caring so much about someone who treats them with such contempt. And this silence, the victim's silence, protects the manipulator. It allows the abuse to continue undetected, unchallenged, unbroken. In 1981, in Milpitas, California, a case study stunned psychologists.
13 teenagers kept absolute silence for 3 days after a classmate murdered a young girl. They knew what happened. They had been there. Some had even taken trips to view the body. But none of them spoke. None of them broke the silence.
The blank generation effect. Emotional poverty so profound that even witnessing murder couldn't prompt accountability. The silence spread like a virus, infecting all 13, binding them in a conspiracy of nothing. The dissolving power of conversation is immense.
Both meditation and action require silence. The Romanian philosopher Emil Cioran understood this dark dimension of silence. He wrote about the dissolving power of conversation, how words can scatter our attention, dilute our intensity, distract us from the abyss.
Both meditation and action, he argued, require silence. But the silence of meditation is generative. The silence of manipulation is destructive. Same tool, opposite purposes.
This is the paradox you must master.
In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Now we reach the core distinction, the fork in the road where most people choose wrong. The silence that masters emotions is not repression. It's not suppression.
It's not the tight-lipped stoicism of someone afraid to feel. It's the creation of space. Viktor Frankl, the Austrian psychiatrist who survived 4 Nazi concentration camps, distilled his entire philosophy into one sentence. Between stimulus and response, there is a space.
In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Think about what he endured: starvation, torture, the constant presence of death, the systematic dehumanization of an entire people.
And in that hell, he discovered that the one thing the Nazis could not take from him was his ability to choose his response. They could control his body, his environment, his circumstances, but they could not control the space between what happened to him and how he responded. That space is silence.
Not the silence of repression, but the silence of sovereignty.
50% reduction in worry intensity by postponing emotional response. Modern psychology has given this a name: cognitive distancing. It's the ability to step back from your thoughts and emotions and observe them without being consumed by them.
Research shows that simply postponing an emotional response, literally saying to yourself, "I will feel this anger in 30 minutes, but not right now," reduces the intensity of that emotion by approximately 50%. Half, just by creating space.
The Stoic Week pilot studies have confirmed this repeatedly. Participants who practiced deliberate pause techniques, who learned to insert silence between stimulus and response, reported a 10% increase in psychological well-being and a 10% decrease in negative emotions after only 7 days.
7 days. That's all it takes to begin rewiring your relationship with your own mind. The 3-second rule. 1. Feel the impulse rise. Notice the heat, the tension, the narrative. 2. Enter the silence. Become no body, no thing, no time, as Joe Dispenza describes it. 3.
Choose your response from the inner citadel, not the reactive mind. This is the practice. This is the discipline. 3 seconds. That's all the space you need to change your life.
Ancient Roman fortress, stone walls, unshakable foundation. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king who ruled the Roman Empire at its zenith, wrote in his private meditations, "Nowhere can man find retirement more peaceful and untroubled than in his own soul." He wasn't speaking metaphorically.
He was describing a place, a psychological fortress that the Stoics called the Inner Citadel. This is the part of you that silence reveals. It's not the absence of sound. It's the presence of sovereignty. When you master absolute silence, you're not withdrawing from the world.
You're accessing the command center. You're stepping back from the front lines of your own psyche and taking your position as the general.
Nowhere can man find retirement more peaceful and untroubled than in his own soul. Musonius Rufus, one of the great Stoic teachers of ancient Rome, measured the success of a philosophy lecture not by applause, but by whether it reduced its audience to silence. Think about that.
He didn't want cheers. He didn't want agreement. He wanted silence,
because in that silence, his students were confronting themselves. They were seeing their own shortcomings, their own contradictions, their own distance from the ideals they claim to pursue. Silence, in that context, is a mirror.
It shows you who you really are, not who you pretend to be. The dangerous power of silence is this. It dissolves the masks, it strips away the performance, it leaves you alone with the only thing that matters, the quality of your own character. 10%. Increase in well, being after 1 week of Stoic mindfulness practice. The research is clear. 1 week of deliberate silence practice, 1 week of inserting the pause, of creating the space, of accessing the inner citadel, produces measurable improvements in psychological well-being. 10%.
In 7 days. Imagine what happens after 7 months, 7 years, 7 decades.
Crossroads, diverging paths, transformation. So here's your choice. It's the most important choice you'll make today, this week, this year. It's the choice that determines whether silence becomes your prison or your power.
Will you use silence as repression, killing your emotions, suppressing your truth, becoming a statistical candidate for stress dwarfism and immune collapse? Will you be the person who never shows anger, who never expresses pain, who smiles while their body dies inside?
Or will you use silence as the Stoics intended, as the respite of the confident and the strong, as the space where you exercise what philosopher Byung-Chul Han calls negative potency, the power not to react, not to be pulled by every impulse, not to be a puppet of circumstance?
We suffer more often in imagination than in reality. Seneca said we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. The silence we're talking about is the silence that ends imaginary suffering.
It's the silence that lets you see the impression for what it is. Not a threat, not a catastrophe, not the end of the world, but simply an impression. The mental event, a passing cloud in the sky of your consciousness. The universe, as the cosmic pessimists remind us, is indifferent to your desires.
Eugene Thacker wrote about the world without us. The world as it exists independently of human hopes, human struggles, human meanings. It's absolutely unhuman. It doesn't care about your plans, your dreams, your suffering. In the face of this abyss, silence is the only coherent response.
Not the silence of despair, but the silence of clarity. The silence that comes from accepting reality as it is, not as you wish it to be. 10% decrease in negative emotions after Stoic week practice. But it's also the most powerful response.
Because when you stop fighting reality, when you stop demanding that the universe conform to your preferences, you free up an enormous amount of energy. Energy that was being wasted on resistance. Energy that can now be directed toward action, toward creation, toward the art of living.
Integration, wholeness, calm authority, the figure now radiating power. Master your emotions through absolute silence, and you master the only thing you ever truly controlled, your own mind.
This is the discipline of the thrifty tongue, the understanding that every word you speak is a piece of your finite energy, and that silence is often the highest return on that investment.
This is the sovereignty of the pause, the recognition that you are not your impulses, not your emotions, not your thoughts. You are the space in which they arise, and in that space, you are free.
This is the self-knowledge that comes from negation,
The stripping away of everything that is not you, until only the inner citadel remains invulnerable, unshakable, eternal.
This is the acceptance of the absurd that leads to ataraxia, the serenity that no external storm can touch, because it's not dependent on external conditions.
It is not things that trouble us, but our judgments about things. Epictetus, the slave who became a teacher, distilled the entire Stoic tradition into one sentence. It is not things that trouble us, but our judgments about things. The thing itself is neutral.
Your colleague undermining you in the meeting, that's just an event. Your partner's criticism, that's just sound waves. The traffic jam, the rejected application, the failed relationship. These are just things happening in the world. What troubles you is not the thing.
It's your judgment about the thing. The story you tell yourself about what it means, what it says about you, what it implies for your future. And in silence, you see those judgments clearly for the first time. You see them as what they are, mental constructions, not reality.
And once you see them, you can choose whether to keep them or let them go. The figure walks forward into the world, radiating calm authority. When you walk back into the world from this silence, you're not the same person who entered it.
You've become what the Stoics called a master of the art of living. The dangerous power of absolute silence is now yours. Use it wisely.